I wanted to show the tools I use so that if anyone else wants to start making custom dolls, they can learn the exact tools I use when I do mine. This is where I store most of my stuff. Whilst this may not be the best stock box, I think it's okay for a beginner. This is the contents of my stock box. Firstly, we have the dolls. The way I get my dolls is by looking online at auctions, most notably on eBay. What I do is look for bundles of dolls that have been old and used. If you find bundles of dolls with broken arms, missing arms, greasy hair or damaged parts, you'll find they're usually a lot cheaper. This is quite helpful as it means that when I'm making the dolls, I'm able to get them at a more affordable price instead of paying a lot more for brand new dolls. With some dolls I keep the hair on. This is mainly because I like the hair that is already rooted and I don't want to change the hair in these dolls. In other dolls you will notice that they are missing their hair. This is because I pulled it out using a rerouting method. I shall link some links in the description. What I did was pull the hair out through here. I need to find a way to do it without damaging the heads, as I discovered that I had a bad habit of doing this, so that is something I will be trying to do. Another thing you will notice is that the heads are not attached to the bodies, like they are with the dolls with the hair on. This is so that I could pull the hair out accurately. The only exception was this doll, but this is complicated, and I will explain when I do her rerouting and her doll design. Another thing you will notice is that they are all missing their makeup. This is because before I put them in the box, I always make sure to wash off their makeup with acetone. I also do the same to the paint on the head. This is so that when I look at a doll, I can have inspiration and ideas of what different types of dolls I want to make beforehand and prepare in advance. Making sure that I have multiple dolls I can look at means that whenever I have a project idea, I know exactly what body I want to use and how I can do it. It also means that I don't get burnt out, because it means that I always have something I can look at for inspiration and have ideas always flowing. Next, I have the clothing and spare parts. These are all the things I store inside that bag. The main reason I store them in there is so that none of the tiny bits go missing in the box, and so that I know where each individual piece is. Firstly, there's the clothes. These come with every single doll I buy. Some of them don't have clothes, but the majority of them do. The reason I keep these is so that I can have inspiration. If I need to make something, and I have something already in the stock box that I think would work with the doll, I'm more inclined to use it, because I think it will work well. Sometimes things like a shirt will work well with the doll, maybe sometimes a pair of trousers. Maybe I will even change them up, change the design or the pattern. You can see this in my first video. Other times it will be something like the actual shirt itself, and I will de-thread it so that I can have the pattern to make more of the same shirt. Next are the shoes. I always love when a doll comes with a new pair of shoes because I love the details on them. For example, the way these tiny shoes have really cool detail and design all over them. And then you look at these ones and they have chains, and all of them are so elaborately detailed, and I love it. It gives me so much inspiration. These usually come in handy when I make a doll, as all I have to do is repaint them, maybe change the colour to fit a doll more, or even just because I think that a detail might look a little better on the shoes. This obviously isn't the only technique I want to use, and I do want to learn how to make my own custom shoes to go with my dolls. However, as a building block, these are really great for learning different ways and skills when it comes to designs and patterns that I could use for shoes. So not all of them are basic and simple, but detailed. Keeping all of these in a sandwich bag is so helpful, as it means I'm not able to lose any of them. And all of these accessories that I have here, I didn't buy separately. They all came with dolls that I had bought in bulk. and that's why I found them so useful. And another reason it's good to buy bulk dolls that you find in an auction. I would like to clarify, this is something that worked for me as I found it a cheap alternative to finding dolls quickly. However, if you have some in your attic, maybe at a charity shop, or some given from a friend, or if you find some in a shop that are still in the box, no matter what doll you use or how you find it, they will work for you. I just find this is the way I can find a varied amount with different designs and styles. I find helpful for me. And if you are a beginner who doesn't know where to look or how to find dolls at an affordable price, this is the sort of technique I would recommend, especially because doll making can be very expensive. Next is the hair for the wigs. You can use any fabric, design or texture. These are wool, I think, yarn, something along those lines. These ones I bought on eBay, I shall link in the description below. The reason I bought these ones is because it meant that I could have a varied design of colours, and that meant that I would be able to find different styles and know what I want to do for a doll. As I bought this, it meant that this is the sort of style and texture I'm going for. However, this is not the only way to restyle. For example, because these are made of yarn, they have certain strengths and weaknesses. I would say they look less realistic as doll hair and can fall apart easier as they thread a lot shorter. However, they also have strengths in the fact they are cheaper and can be more varied in colours. As you can see, the texture varies drastically from the synthetic hair that you find in an average monster high heel, for example. It tears apart a lot easier. However, it also has a less shiny effect that is on the synthetic hair. This reason, it could be really useful if you want the hair to look less shiny and less plasticky. Another thing I will note is the fact that it takes a lot of work and practice. I might struggle with this at first, but then the more I practice, the better I find it. Someone else might find synthetic hair better. Others may find wool better. Some may find that buying yarn in a shop is what works for them. Trying different techniques when you first start out is really good. I bought all of these in a bulk. One of the main reasons I did this was the same reason I bought a bulk of dolls. Because of the fact that I would be able to have different ways to experiment and try out this new hobby that I very much enjoy, whilst not stressing over having to constantly buy new things. I wanted to prepare myself in advance. Next, I'm going to talk about the pencils and the pastels. First, I will focus on the pencils. And I would just like to notice the note that came with this when I ordered it from eBay. I just thought it was really sweet, so I left it there. However, I need to mention the importance of this. Because what you'll find is your results can vary heavily depending on what pencils you use. The reason I say this is because if you want to start out making a doll, you'll realise how expensive everything is and you'll want to go cheaper, and that is something I was planning to do. I bought some pencils, but didn't realise that I had bought plain pencils, not watercolour. The reason it is so important to use watercolour pencils is because they are the only ones that stick well to the doll's final faces, and that is the reason everyone uses them when making the dolls, or at least those ones that use them on dolls. Another reason is because of the fact that you shouldn't put oil on the doll's skin, well, vinyl dolls. You could technically if you were washing them, however they can react badly to spray and seal them, so you always want to be cautious, which is why it's best to be watercolour. After feeling the feet and realising that I had bought the wrong colours, I had decided to buy some more. Before I did some research. This is where I realised how important it is to get good watercolour pencils. Because if you want to start a doll and you realise that they aren't working, then you might feel defeated and give up. When in actuality, you could be working with low quality products. Some pencils stick to vinyl less, but it had all the colours I need that are primary. I have my whites, I have my blacks, my orange, red, yellow, greens, blues, browns. There aren't many purples, but it's a basic palette. If I could get more in the future, I will definitely be doing so. The one thing I will say, however, is that I did get this at a discount. It could be because there was little white spots on the ends of the pencils. However, after doing research, I had realised that that was okay and that you just have to scrape it off. I don't know if that is true or accurate, so do not take my word for it. But they do still work well. These are extremely expensive pencils, I am aware, and it is quite a lot to save. So if you're trying to do this cheaper, it can be terrifying and intimidating. But I would recommend these, as these are good quality and will work well. What I found when I bought these was I actually got them cheaper, a lot cheaper. I think when I was looking online, I saw some for around £80, which was incredibly expensive to me for some pencils, especially this amount. But I got these at a massive discount by looking on online shops, and luckily I wasn't scammed. I was very scared for that, but luckily it was okay. This is why I bought these, and I find these work well. If you were thinking of starting a new custom doll, or by trying to try this out, I would highly recommend researching the different brands that work well or that are commonly used. These are often used. You always want to use watercolour pencils, and you want to make sure that they are quality that work on the dolls. There are people on YouTube who have done experiments with different pencils and how well they blend with different dolls and different vinyl heads. I will link them in the description so you can check them out if you want, because those are so important and help loads when trying to discover what pencils are best, but definitely best to save your money and spend them on the pencils. And next it's the pastels. I wasn't entirely sure if this is the exact same when it came to the pastels, so I didn't do the same. I did, however, buy the same pastels that a YouTuber I follow used, so that I could have them. The first thing to note is the fact that these are soft pastels. Just like with the pencils, you don't want to use any oil, so you want to make sure you're using oil-free products, and that is why I use these. One thing you'll find is these have lots of different colours. It's not the entire rainbow, but it works for a basic palette, and it works well with multiple different styles, so I'm able to use it. You can see which colours I have used more of, mainly the oranges, the reds and the purples, and a bit of the blacks. What you'll find is the colours come off very easily. This is helpful for when you want to do a project, because then you are able to do it right. And this is great for getting the pigment onto the doll's final faces or bodies. I usually do this with a paintbrush, however I have also found that using my fingertips have helped if I'm trying to cover the whole body. I wouldn't fully recommend this though, as I'm not entirely sure how good that is for the overall doll. One thing to keep note of though is how to use these. Most people will find some sandpaper or something to scratch the pencil on, not the pencil, the pastel. They will scratch it on the sandpaper, and then they'll have loads of pigment. That way they are able to use it well with all the pigment being off. I don't have any proper sandpaper I can use, so I usually keep them inside of this palette. But you will see the pastels have slightly gone to the sides. I will usually use the paintbrush and scrape at the sides slightly, or get the bit of pastels on the side instead, as that is a way to pick up the pigment quicker without having to use sandpaper. Though if you do have sandpaper, I would definitely recommend that more. Next, I have extra tools that I use that are really helpful with the dolls. They came with hairbrushes, so I kept them because they were so important when you need to brush through a doll's hair, though I do not recommend brushing it through the wool hair that I bought if you do that, because it does pull the hair out. I also made sure that I bought some false lashes, so that if I wanted a doll to have 3-dimensional lashes, I could put them on them. These were only cheap ones from a pound shop. However, it's okay because I'm able to trim them down and keep them in a shape that I want. I liked the design because they weren't too exaggerative and weren't too big, but they also weren't too small or simple. So I find these work well. I also have moldable erasers, and you can see on this one where I have used it around a doll. I will admit that I still haven't found out how to use these properly, so I'm still trying to get the hang of it. But if you know how to use these, then they are extremely helpful for things like getting pencil off the corners where you miss, or helping to finalize small details. I also have this glitter. It was given as a present, so I don't know where it's from, but I think it would be really useful for some dolls, maybe on clothes or on their skin, I'm not sure. But I think it's really helpful, so I keep it in mind, and I keep it in my drawer so that if I want to use it, it's always there. Next I have this gloss varnish. These you can put on the doll's eyes or mouth. You can put it anywhere really. However, this helps to give a nice glossy shine to the dolls. This I usually use on the mouth as it makes the lip gloss and lipstick look more glossy and less matte. I will say that some people don't put these on the eyes as it can make a glare effect, making it hard to take photos. I realised that, and I think I will stick to just having it on the water duct if I do that again in the future. These are just a few paintbrushes. I will look around my room looking for different paintbrushes, but these are the ones I keep for the doll specifically. Especially brushes like this, which mean that I am able to get a better angle. This long brush I realised works the best for eyelashes. This I realised in my last video, and you can actually see where I transfer to using this, as it was most helpful for me. This I have found was really useful for getting the soft pastels out, as the bristles are very rough, so it meant that they were able to scrape off pastel. And I use this brush very similarly, however it's less harsh, so that when I brush it onto the doll, it doesn't leave scratchy texture. These are just a few brushes I use, but if you have any paintbrushes or makeup brushes or anything extra that you don't use, they can be really helpful for your doll. Lastly, I have the files, more or less sandpaper. I mentioned before that I don't have any sandpaper I can use, and that's because these are for a specific use, and if I use them to get the pastels off and onto them, then it means that when I want to use them for something else, they will be dirty and smudged. You can see these ones are already worn out and have almost completely run out of the friction. These were also bought in a pound shop, and while it's good for a few uses, they don't last a long time. In fact, I only saw them working on 2 dolls before completely being worn out, or 1 doll each per file. These were good though, as they do have different size of buffers. If you can find any of these, usually in a pound shop or dollar store, then they will be extremely useful if you want to file the doll's body. This is because when you have a doll and you want to repaint their body, they have this shiny coating on top of them. This is left there so that when they are in the mold, they can be taken out easier without damage. However, when you're trying to repaint a doll, you will find that that exact layer makes it impossible to work with. The spray will not seal, and the paint or powder or whatever you use will not stick as well to the doll. So prepping the doll's body for that is extremely important. Once you have sanded the body down though, you want to make sure that you are able to keep it smooth and not rough. That's why I bought a multi-use buffer, so that it can buff, polish and shine. Well, that says smooth and the last side says shine. I don't usually use the 6th one as I don't want it to be shiny. However, this helps to make the doll look more like how it looks when you get it and not like it's been scratched apart. I have been using this one because it was a bit more quality for getting the dolls to look okay. However, I do find that this will not last long either, so I don't have proper sandpaper. That is unfortunate, but I'm hoping to get some in the future so that I'm able to use dolls. If you do want to prep the doll's body or paint the doll's body when you get into doing this craft, it's really important to make sure that you keep in mind how helpful nail files can be. And you don't need the most expensive product. Sometimes something simple from a pound shop can help you loads. Next, there's tools. This is one of the most important parts when making a doll, and something you should never take for granted, because it is so important to make sure that your safety is always met when you're making these dolls. Firstly, I have a glue gun. This is something that is helpful in any crafter's craft box, as it can be so useful in so many different ways. For dolls, I usually find if I need something to work or fit together, it can help well, especially if it's not working with other techniques. This could be for little bits of jewellery, it could be for putting bits of clothes on, it could also be for hair. However, I would not recommend this as a permanent solution for things, such as a way to put clothes together. If you could learn to use sew or make them that way, it would be a lot better, as it means that it would be longer lasting, whereas the glue won't hold it as well. But if you do need one, it is always useful to keep, just in case. For the reason that I have a glue gun, I also have glue sticks, a lot of spare glue sticks. This is just a few from the bag I had, as just like the accessories for the dolls, I keep these in a bag to keep them safe. Moving on from the glue gun, I have glue. I'm also hoping to get permanent glue, or sticky glue, super glue, that's the word, super glue. I'm also hoping to get super glue. However, for now, I have these, and these can be helpful in so many ways. Fabritec is really good for keeping the hair in place if you are rerooting. This is something I did for my first doll, but I didn't record that one. I didn't find the results worked well for me, which is why I decided to move on to gluing wigs instead. And that's why I used this one instead, as PVA glue dried quicker, and I also found it was more helpful for disappearing and working with the yarn on the wigs, putting them together. Both of these are really helpful though, as whilst the PVA glue can be really helpful for the hairs, it does not stick the wig to the head as easily as the Fabritec glue does. It may take longer, but both of these are really helpful and important. If you also have super glue, it would also be helpful. So that's another thing to keep in mind. Glue helps loads with these, and I can't recommend them enough. The next product is the holy grail of every single doll artist. Mr. Super Clear. Something that most doll artists use, as there aren't many alternatives that people find work for them. There are some, however this is the go-to brand for most people, as it works most effectively on a doll. I got the UV cut one, and I can't understand the rest of the writing apart from Mr. Super Clear Flat and Mr. Hobby, and obviously the bit of English on the back. However, this is the matte finish. If you are wanting to do the face up, you will want the matte, as they also do a gloss varnish one. That one would be helpful after you've finished, but whilst you're doing the doll, you want to make sure you have the flat. The reason you want to use Mr. Super Clear is so that you have a strong base. Instead of just drawing onto a smooth surface, it gives a lot of friction so that the pencil marks stay, so that the pastels stay, and once you have everything placed down, if you spray it again with Mr. Super Clear, then it keeps it sealed and stops it from rubbing off or smudging. This is honestly one of the most important things to use, and another thing you should not miss out on if you want to do a custom doll, because using this can be the difference between the doll working or nothing showing up at all. However, there is something very important to keep in mind when you're using Mr. Super Clear, and that is exactly this. So, the next thing, a mask and gloves. So Mr. Super Clear is extremely toxic, and everyone advocates for use of a mask. This is extremely important because the fumes of Mr. Superclear are toxic to breathe in and can cause irreversible damage if used over a prolonged period of time, which is something that nobody wants. So it's always best to make sure you stay safe. This is a ventilating mask. I'm not entirely sure if this is the one I need because I do struggle with stuff like that. However, if I do realise it is not the incorrect version, I will buy a stronger one. You want to make sure you have a mask that works well for you and that blocks out any of the inhalation of Mr. Superclear at all. This is incredibly important and incredibly advocated for and should not be missed out. And of course there's gloves. I wear these whilst using the spray as well so that it doesn't get on my skin and doesn't irritate it. I also use them though when using a doll, so that if I am repainting their body, my sweat on my hands or my hands being dirty, though I do wash them before I do make the dolls, if anything happens or my hands get sweaty or I'm holding the doll a lot, it could smudge the doll's pastels or pencil if I am using the body of the doll. So I prefer to wear gloves whilst handling the doll's body, so that this is less likely to happen. Some artists will also use these whilst handling the doll entirely, however I find them can be a bit of an issue and hassle, so I do prefer to use my bare hands and wash them beforehand, so there's no oils or anything that can get in the way of the dolls. Gloves are super important, and just like the mask, should not be missed out on. You might not think they're necessary, but they can be so helpful. And just like with Mr. Superclear and the face ventilator, these things overall are incredibly important when looking for a doll customization, and you shouldn't skip out on these steps because of how important they are. So if you do want to start doing this craft, this is definitely some things that you want to keep in mind. Next are the doll stands. These came with the dolls that I had bought, however if they hadn't come with them, I would have bought them separately anyway, because I know how important they are. These are good for using them for prop stands to hold the dolls on, but I also find them useful for other reasons. Instead of just having the stand on this, and with the doll on it, I use this whilst crafting. For example, if I'm going to spray the head with Mr. Superclear, I will put the doll's head on top of a stand and then spray it. That way I'm not holding it at any length with my hand, which could interfere with the spray setting as my hands would be in the way. It also means that I can hold it at a good distance from myself, and that whilst it's drying I can keep it held up in a position away from any danger or hazards. As well as this, I find it helpful if I'm painting shoes or any extra accessories. So I always use these if needed, and these are extremely helpful. They're also good for keeping them on display. One of the reasons I will be investing in more stands is for that exact reason. This last part is a personal preference, however something I find helpful. Warning, this may look messy. A lot of fluffy stuff. The reason I had this personally was because, as someone who has had multiple dolls in the past, I know that just placing them into a box altogether is the number one way to have them get messed up and messy. Something I don't want to happen, but I also don't have the space to display all my dolls. So I decided that a way I could handle this was by packing them all. Having small boxes that I made to put them in meant that I could pack them individually and also keep them safe. It's also a method I could use if I were to sell dolls. However, I also find this is just helpful as a way to store them as well, so that I know exactly which doll is which and how to store them without them messing up each other. The reason I have this is so that if they're in the box, I can pad this around the boxes to keep them safe, so if they fall or something happens, there is padding. That's why there's lots of this. And this isn't something you need to buy. What I did was whenever I got something in the post, if it came with some fabric or materials like this, or if it came with lots of shredded cardboard, well, paper, then I would keep it because it would be so helpful when storing my dolls. I also found that I bought this because also something I think would be helpful if I were to sell them in the future. Something I would like to learn to do. So it's a nice way to present them nice, whilst put away and nicely stored. This is my entire stock box, all stored neatly into a tiny drawer. As you can see from the length of the video though, this video isn't over. And whilst I have a stock box, that isn't the only things I use. For example, this cardboard. I cut it out from some old boxes into the shape of a new box if I want to store a doll. This is whether it is for future selling ideas or what I usually do, which is just to store them in a way that is comfortable and secure. It makes it more clean, tidy and neat in a way that I know where everything is and organised in boxes that I can keep nicely organised so that I don't mess them up and that they are kept. Quick note, that is not a mandatory thing you need when you're making a doll. It's just a personal preference. Another thing I use when I'm doing dolls is random bits of jewellery. This could be either from a shop or old jewellery. This is seen in my last video where I was using the golden chains of this broken necklace to make doll's jewellery that I was doing at the time. This is really helpful because it means that if ever I want to use something but don't have the stuff, then I don't have to worry about buying balls and balls of just random chains. I can just buy a £2 necklace from a shop and use that instead. But how do I use that? The very simple answer is this. I use this for a lot of things, not just my doll making. And I want to warn you, if you're using any tools, always be supervised by an adult, because these can be dangerous. Unless you're an adult, of course, but you also want to be cautious anyway. These are just things I use for different stuff, so as you can see, some of these can be helpful for cutting metal, so I can do the dolls. These are also useful for getting things, using tools that are good for gripping, and also little dotting tools that I can use, such as I use this to curl the previous doll's hair, as well as using it for things such as the face accessories, or using tiny bits of jewellery. There's also a measuring tool, a screwdriver, and a pair of these, strange this is I don't really understand, but it's always important to have a toolbox or a small tool bag. And when it comes to doll making, these can be extremely useful when you want to do more elaborate or detailed things, such as working with little bits of small metal, or textured designs or fabrics and materials. But no matter what, the toolkit is always helpful. The very last thing is under my bed actually in a drawer, which is this drawer. You might be wondering what is it and why is it a mess? I know, I need to sort this out. This is my fabrics drawer, something I would highly recommend if you do want to do dolls and you want to make their clothes, or if you just want clothes in general. Now, you might think it would be expensive to buy new fabric, and that would be correct. It can be a little pricey depending on where you go, how much you get. However, do not overestimate the importance of old fabrics and clothes. I always find that if something's going out, I always check the fabric first and think, could that come in handy in the future? And if I think that the fabric is really cool or interesting, such as this fluffy material, I would say that I kind of like it and might use it in a doll or a different project in the future. So I'm going to keep a hold of it so that I can use it if I want to. For example, I'm thinking of using this old jumper in a way for a new doll that I have in the plans to make a doll's jumper. Fabrics can be so easy to find if you just look at old clothes. Not to mention the fact that recycling old clothes is always helpful and always a great way to not only help the environment but also save money. I also have this bag of red stuffing from making a wig, not a doll wig, but a actual wig, and that's from the amount of yarn from before, which I now use as stuffing, as well as a bag of stuffing that is in there, which might be useful for dolls in the future, but not mandatory. Now you may be wondering why I have showed you all these things. Well, there's a simple reason for that. The reason is so if anyone wants to start this, then they know exactly what they need to get to start out. It's just a little a lot of guidance to help people who want to start this know some things that they can get, what they need to save money for, and what they need to not save money for. To be honest, it might not be useful, maybe no one will see it. However, it's just a way to help out some people, because sometimes it can be hard to know when you see these people using loads of fancy things, and you wonder if you can do it for just a doll and a few pencils. But when you realise that it's not just that, then you have to save some money. It can be quite stressful and overwhelming. So coming from a person who doesn't have much money, but had to save up quite a lot over a span of a few months and slowly gather the materials I need, as well as being a beginner myself, I'm hoping that this video will help people who have just started find their way, and whilst may not look up to me as a designer and as a professional, may be able to follow my footsteps when it comes to knowing where to start and the starting place when trying to find a way to start this. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you do use this for reference in the future, I hope that you have so much fun making dolls. And if this was just to get an idea of the things that go into making it, then I hope you enjoyed this video anyway. No matter what, I think anyone can do anything and be creative no matter how they want. So as long as you have fun, that's the most important thing.